All right. Hi, this is Pooka, and I'm here with my husband, Ben Jamney.
Hello.
We're going to try a podcast-style tutorial because Ben is not so familiar with the Dreams Create tools. So he's going to ask questions as they come up, and hopefully this will be helpful for other beginning creators.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to this because I haven't actually gotten to spend any time on Dreams yet. So this is...
Because I'm always on the beta. Before we get started, please stop by dreamsverse.com for all your Dreams support discussions and finding friends. So today we're going to look at the compare and contrast paint versus sculpt modes. And when you first go in and you just start up a game scene or any sort of a create thing, probably the first thing you're going to want to do is some sculpting. But when you go into modes, you've got sculpt here and paint. Everything else is things that we could cover later, but the basics are sculpt and paint. So sculpting is where you probably want to start. And the reason for that is that sculpts are physical. So when you start a new creation, the first thing that you're probably going to want to do is sculpture. And when you're in a new game scene, you've already got a little piece of sculpture here, which is this little default floor that they give you. I'm going to delete that just for the moment, and we're going to I'm saying too many times.
That's cool.
We're going to look at the different differences and similarities between sculpt and paint mode, and figure out what's best for your particular uses.
Okay.
Right now we are in assembly mode.
Okay.
The assembly mode is where you are by default, and you know where you are if you go up into the left-hand side. It tells you are in assembly mode, and by default you get the move tool in assembly mode. And that's just where you start out in a normal game scene. Assembly mode is for moving things around, looking at stuff, and it's sort of it's kind of like your home screen. It's your basic default. But you don't have anything, to work with to start. And if you're going to build a level, you need something you can see, and you probably want something that's physical. And that is why we would start with sculpt, because one of the main differences between sculpt and paint is that sculptures have physical collision properties and paintings do not.
And also, well, I think of the 3D environment as being more sculptural than paint-related.
Sure. And
so that seems like a good starting point.
You can make a 3D environment through painting, but it takes a little more finesse, and sculpting is where you're likely to start. It's probably the most straightforward. So I'm going to go into sculpt mode, and I'm going to choose a color because I want to have a little bit of a brighter color than our little default. I'm just going to go and get a nice bright sort of medium molecule pink. And so by default in its sculpt mode, you come in and you've got a square shape. When you go up to the top menu here, the first thing we have is tools. And I'm going to look at the tools. By default, you're on smear shape. There's also stamp shape. And these are two different ways of placing down shapes. So I'll just really quickly go, I'm going to smear a shape, and so I'm just taking that square and moving it around, and it's smearing.
Nice.
If I go and I stamp a shape, I just stamp the square once when I stamp a shape. It doesn't smear the same way. But I do have some other options when I stamp the shape down, and we'll come back and look at those options in a minute. But for right now, I'm just going to stamp that shape, and if I drop my tool, I'm in sculpt mode, but I have the move tool equipped, and I can grab that square that I just stamped and I can move it around here, and I can take this whole big shape that I smeared and I can move that around. And now if I go and I leave this mode, this isn't all one sculpture that I just made out of the two parts, the smear and the stamp.
Nice.
So now that I'm in assembly mode, this moves around like one.
Sure.
And now to compare, let's just get a painting going, and we'll do the same medium molecule pink so that we can kind of see, and we'll look at the tools. Similar tools, we have brush flex, we have stamp fleck, we also have draw fleck, and we'll look at those differences. So brush fleck, I'm brushing it, and I'm squeezing the R2 button to make that stroke. If I go really lightly it's transparent.
Okay. And we're gonna be exclusively on the DS4 for this.
Yes,
Okay.
I do use the moves sometimes, but I'm using the DS4 for the tutorial because I think it's what most people use, and it's also easier to see the menus when I go up into here. And I think of it as the default.
Cool.
So brush flex, that gives you a difference in opacity depending on how hard you squeeze the R2 button. If I go into draw flex, that gives me a change in size. So when I go full strength, it's the same size, and when I go very lightly,
Oh my goodness.
it's thinner, but it doesn't change opacity. And then there's stamping, and stamping just gives you one square, just the same as it does in sculpt mode. So there's just one, and if I drag around, it's just the one. There's also rule flex, and that is like drawing on a ruler. I'm just going to move the camera back a little bit to the side so we can see. So I press and hold R2, and I go whatever direction I want, and it just makes a straight line. And you can do this on the grid if you want really clean straight lines, or you can do it freehand to just do whatever line you want. And now if I drop the tool, just like in sculpt mode, I can take these individual strokes that I made, and I can move them around. But if I exit this mode, now this is one painting, this is one sculpture.
Okay.
So scoping in, which is a shortcut of pressing L1 and X, now I'm scoped in and I can work on just my painting, and I could go back to my move tool and move these individual strokes.
So the other image has gone gray for that moment. So it's kind of like you're just focusing on this creation, right?
Exactly, and if I go in here and I don't want to see anything at all, I can say hide everything else if the other stuff is in the way.
Nice.
And
That's
you can undo that, and there's a little prompt
Cool.
telling us what that is. And then the shortcut to scope out is to press L1 and circle at the same time.
Wow. That's fun.
So that's the very beginning intro of just setting down some shapes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Laying some shapes.
we're just laying some shapes. I think in this case we're laying shapes,
Yeah.
but maybe we'll be throwing shapes later on.
Future installment.